can handle it.
I'm glad they heard that. I am with Douglas Kinney Frost. He is going to be conducting the opera Santa Barbara's production coming up on Friday, November 6th, Sunday, November 8th. We'll talk about the details there in a minute. Mozart's Don Giovanni, the great masterpiece, the last three great operas with his pal Da Ponte,
Incredible.
the librettist. All three works. We're talking about a series I've got it here somewhere. Tell me, you know the three.
Sure. Well, these are called the Italian operas of Mozart because he had the gift of Lorenzo di Ponte to be his librettist.
Yeah.
The Ponte was one of the most interesting characters. I think Mozart gets all the credit usually, but Da Ponte deserves his own stance. This Mozart and Da Ponte were relentless in getting the text correct. Mozart had a notorious relationship in all the wrong ways with his librettists, and he worked well with Da Ponte. They worked out their issues, and ended up having really three of the hallmark benchmark operas in the repertoire
Yes.
for sure.
Yeah. And does this have anything to do with there being Masonic brothers that they worked things out?
I think that the Freemason role for Mozart at the time was a little bit different than we perceive it now. I think it was a little bit on the secret side, but I don't think it was the closed door society that it is now. And strongly feel that artists at the time, particularly artists who relied on the community and the support of patrons, I think those people needed to be part of the club. And the club was being a Freemason, and I think there was probably a few more elbows bent and glasses raised in the meetings than perhaps now. But yes, for sure that is a connection, and we certainly see that in Mozart's work orchestrally, and we certainly see it in Giovanni, and God knows in the Magic Flute.
Yeah. And what I meant was the Enlightenment. To be a Freemason was to say loud and clear, I am an enlightened person. Yeah, this Freemasonry.
Absolutely. And I also think we have to remember we're a couple of years approaching the French Revolution. I think
Same here.
there's an intention of what it meant to be at a certain social level and how comfortable we all were with those things that influenced Mozart's works in the last several years.
Not to mention the American Revolution. I mean, this was a revolutionary period brought about maybe by enlightenment, if you will.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
The sense of philosophical awareness of who we were as individuals, crucial, and that's exactly the gift of Mozart in these three operas.
Now let me
That
get. Oh, sorry. Finish,
no,
please.
please.
Well, I just want to get some credits in here. You know, we are speaking with the producing artistic director of Syracuse Opera. I just want everybody in Southern California to know this. And just to get clear a little bit, Friday, November 6th, 7:30 p.m., Granada Theater in downtown Santa Barbara. Sunday, November 8th, 2:30 p.m. In the Granada Theater again. That's the big building in Santa Barbara. You can't miss it. And as I tell everyone, what a beautiful time of year to come up to Santa Barbara from Los Angeles and hang out and have a meal and have a good time.
Is there a bad time to come up to Santa Barbara while you're in California? I don't know. It seems pretty amazing here.
Remember, everybody, he's from Syracuse. What can I
Right.
say? Uh,
Oh,
just
absolutely. This is
uh,
this is a magical sunshine right now.
we have tickets $29 to $204. I suppose that's a box, but the point is cheap tickets and a masterpiece, a work of art that anybody interested in music really needs to see. But I'm going to ask you why in a minute. Telephone number for tickets, area code 805 in Santa Barbara, 899-2222. Now let me talk a little bit. You're not new to the Southern California area. You were very involved with James Conlon, Los Angeles Opera. You're a Britain specialist.
That's
Let's
what
talk.
James tells me. That's what Maestro Conlon says to me. Yes.
This is nice. And you were involved in that whole Britain series. Yeah,
It
somewhat.
was a remarkable experience. We deal with such a variety of composers to focus on one individual, and Maestro Conlon's a tour de force. And when he moves through a project, things happen and things get accomplished nicely. And when he feels like I'm contributing to those projects, I'm all for it. We were all over the world with Britain, and
Wow.
remains again like very similar to Mozart, sort of a standard for opera once those pieces were produced.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And what a change from the 40s and 50s. In other words, Britain has now become quite the repertory person for
Sure.
major opera companies. I wanted to ask you about a couple things, but let me start here. Let me find my note here. Can you give, people really are, let's say, very enthusiastic and they come to the opera, but I'll ask you about those who might not have any interest in opera, why they should maybe consider Don Giovanni. But this idea of can you give me just briefly a timeline so people get an idea of what is the timeline about putting together a professional production? You know what I mean? When does the first call happen? When does it, I mean phone call, and then when does it get to the, so on?
These productions actually take years to produce. It's our company usually take very thoughtful care to craft individuals to participate as singers. Crucial that you have a conductor and a director who you feel are going to shape the piece in a certain way. From that comes elements of the production, what the visuals will look like, costumes and sets, and that sorts of thing, and that often takes years. And when you're talking about a new production, this is not a new production, but when you're talking about a new production, it takes years, and certainly you want to have as much advance time to find those elements. For me, it's about ensemble casting. I always look for, in this case, I want to know who the Don Giovanni is before I hire a Donna Anna, or I want to know who Rodolfo is before I hire a Mimi, because I think these pieces are about crafting stories through relationships, and those characters need more even than being stellar artists. I find it's important that they be of similar mind. That and for me, that means looking at a piece of music and not singing eighth notes and quarter notes, but
Hello.
singing intentions of line. Like, what is
Hello.
the text about? That's something I get often. I don't think people understand that opera starts with text, and it took me a while to figure that out too. You work with new composers, and then you become a little more clear about that. And one of my favorites is David Carlson. He's not doesn't do a lot of work on the West Coast, but he made a really interesting point to me, which is a composer may have a melody in their head. They may have a harmonic progression in their head. They may have a rhythm in their head, but they look for context. They look for text within a story for the times to develop that. But for sure, if you look at history from Monteverdi, when opera even started, great composers start with text. Really, all composers start with text. So when I'm interpreting, I conduct text. If I'm doing an orchestral piece without text, then perhaps the choices are a little more subjective in a way. So kind of a general statement, but when it comes to any piece that has text, you conduct the text.
Yeah.
The music supports the text, period.
And in both cases, if I'm following you correctly, it's about imagery. In other words, text dictates musical imagery, let alone visual imagery. And in music, and you're also very thoroughly engaged as a symphonic conductor. You know what I'm saying? It's about
Sure.
creating an oral
You know,
imagery, if you will. Yeah.
Absolutely. When you hear an orchestra that looks at the score and comes at it as a great player, and they get that bum 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 is not about an intervallic change, or if they play it as it's not, then that's when we get excited. That's when we as audience members and listeners get excited. And to me, quintessentially, there is no better example of that than Mozart. Mozart is the example that Puccini used, that Verdi used, Gluck also along those lines. But really, when it comes down to getting a sense of structure, a sense of architecture in a piece, Mozart, hands down, is the example.
Yes. To say nothing of how he projects an idea or a feeling or a sensibility musically. Yeah.
Sure.
So if
And
you, sorry, go ahead.
no, and it's very sophisticated. I find also people think that Mozart's sort of pretty, but I do not want to listen to 3 hours of pretty. I don't want to listen to 3 hours of angry. I don't want to listen to 3 hours of any one dimension. And Mozart, sometimes every other phrase, every other line, changes intention, and it's our job to create a real palette for storytelling that way.
As we have discovered with Haydn, frankly. Now people are
Sure.
finally understanding Haydn, you know?
I
The
agree.
colors, the moods, the sudden changes, the humor, all the rest of it.
Right.
We have to move on. Thank you for kind of sort of bringing us back to Don Giovanni, but so therefore what I'm asking you is if you had one area that you could say to every audience member as they came in, assuming that they might not know much about this opera, what section would you say in which act where they would experience Mozart, the genius that everyone talks about? Can you
Okay,
give me that?
Mozart the genius can be found from the moment
I
the
know.
orchestra plays to the end. No,
I,
no.
f- I fell I fell right into that one. You're correct. I knew at the
Act
minute you started. Go.
two really fun things happen in Act One in the finale of Act One and one in the finale of Act Two, where the story is such that Don Giovanni has brought a young maiden from his village back to his house for a party. Well, and actually, it's her wedding day, and he invites the entire complement of her village to come with him and come to his house. And of course, his intention is to be with her, and really couldn't care less about anybody else. Um, Three of the other characters who are of his class level interrupt this, and so you have a very cinematic moment where there are lots of scenes happening on stage at one time. And what Mozart does that is utterly brilliant is he divides the orchestra into three different orchestras. They're playing in the same harmony, but they have different rhythm. And the idea is if you're at a party and you're listening to Conversation A in the corner, and maybe that's P Diddy on the CD playing, and you go and somebody else has jazz playing in the other room, and a third person has Blake Shelton playing. I don't know,
I wish I knew
but
who you were talking about. That's how classicist I am. Go ahead.
imagine three very different styles of
kind,
music happening at the same, like one experiences at a party. Three
no,
different, some conversations more animated than others. Some conversations happening between two people, some between three in a group. Mozart creates a musical moment where you have three very individual musical moments happening at the same time, and it all comes out of this idea of storytelling, that you're at a party, you're at the Don's house, and you're waiting for him to seduce the little peasant girl.
by the way, we got to hurry because you have to get back to rehearsal here pretty soon. But is this your first Don? Let me ask.
No, 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 no. I've done many productions of this. I love it.
He
It's
just
one of
throws it off many productions. I mean, come on.
Well, for me, you get to a point where hopefully you have some influence in the work that you do, and when someone raises their hands and says, "I have a Mozart da Ponte opera," I start jumping up and down and raising my hands, "Choose me, choose me, choose me," because I believe that it's all there, it's lined up, and I approach this score with a great deal of humility, which I do all of Mozart because I learned so much about who he is and about, honestly, this sounds like a grand statement, but I learned so much about humanity when I'm looking at a Mozart score because these characters are so dimensional. That's what Mozart brought at the time. He brought people who were not commedia dell'arte, who were the ingenue or the seducer. Don Giovanni's so complex as a character. He's not just the Don Juan stereotype.
Just
He's so layered.
let me jump in with this. The publicity has talked about a film noir aspect.
Sure.
Can you
Yes.
can you give us any little teeny weeny hint? It's not going to be
Uh,
black and white, right?
it's like a fantastic 40s Fellini film. Think about that. This
Woo.
can happen. This stuff can happen in any time period if the
Mhm.
relationships are true.
Yeah,
If
exactly.
you're crafting music and intentions of scenes that are true, it can exist in any time period. So it's fun to try that. It's fun to see what would for example, in the traditional time period, perhaps there would be a stabbing with a knife. In the
Uh
40s, a Fellini's
oh.
film, perhaps it's
Uh
something
oh.
else.
Oh my
So
God, he gave it away.
coming up with those, not entirely, I didn't give it away
Okay.
entirely. Coming up with those little intricacies helps keep it alive for us and bring it to a context for everyone.
Okay, now very last one. Then you got to get out of here.
Okay.
In your perspective, what we just talked extensively about why people are going to want to come in the door, but is there just a 7-word thing that says why does the guy who would rather sit home, drink beer, and watch football go with the wife who's dragging him in. Forgive me the stereotype, everybody, but just so that you can give me what is it? What is it? What is it?
If he wants to be married the day after the game, then I highly recommend that he come. No, I think that the issue is storytelling. People forget that opera is about storytelling. And if you love film, if you love musicals, if you love straight plays, if you love a really good television drama, opera supports that. The music supports the drama and the storytelling. It's not about having something at you for 3 hours. You know, it's about being a part of a story in a context.
By the way, Douglas Kinney Frost, who will be conducting Don Giovanni the weekend of November 6th and 8th. I have a feeling this is going to be a fairly highly charged, energized Don Giovanni.
Bring it, baby.
You sound pretty, well, bring it on, baby is right. Anyway, Douglas Kinney Frost. What can I call you, Douglas? Can I say Doug?
Absolutely.
What? Okay, thank you. You're being general. Anyway, Douglas, many thanks for giving me some time. Now get to rehearsal. By the way, how are things shaping up already?
Very well. We're all through with Act One. We're starting to craft Act Two and be very specific about our choices in Act One. People will get a very clean story when they come to see this production. Very clean, fulfilling look at these people. It's a very fine endeavor. It's very nice to be a part of this.
Yeah, and that is part of this whole process of putting it together. You know, you take it, you hone it, you shape it, you look at it, you shape it some more, you clean it up, and so on, even at the professional level. Yeah.
Well, people don't understand. We can spend 3 hours on one musical turn. Yeah. And by musical turn, I mean emotional turn.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, when does this one specific emotion change? When does one of these women being seduced by Giovanni give in? We spend hours to make that clear and make that readable, so that when you come to the theater, you're moved by this stuff, because we are.
Okay, bravo. Douglas Kinney Frost, I think Syracuse is lucky to have you.
Thank you very much.
Looking forward to seeing this production.
Great.
Bye.